Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to all the tribal leaders, elders, and representatives that are gathered here today. I am honored to be with you and grateful for the opportunity to spend time together with you all at your winter session this year. As you all know, the Department of Justice plays a very unique and solemn role in the government-to-government relationship between the United States and tribal nations. Our responsibilities in Indian country span an enormous landscape and involve nearly every function of the department, from civil litigation and trust-related matters to grant-making, investigating, and prosecuting violent crime and drug trafficking. And that work is complex. It's demanding, and it is impossible to do without very strong partnerships. I am here today because none of this work succeeds in isolation. Real progress in Indian country requires a working relationship rooted in mutual respect, trust, and a shared commitment to the safety and well-being of tribal communities. We know from long experience that we cannot fully understand challenges or design solutions to those challenges that will actually work unless we listen carefully and consistently. That is why, from the beginning of this administration, leaders from across the Department of Justice have traveled to tribal communities to meet directly with leaders and citizens and some of you in this room. Just recently, the Associate Attorney General, Stanley Woodward, attended the 20th Annual Violence Against Women Tribal Consultation in Minnesota just last month. It's why we are so grateful for the candid and constructive conversations during yesterday's breakout session with the DOJ, hosted by our Office of Tribal Justice. I want to thank you for that engagement. It matters. It matters to me, it matters to the department, and it matters to this administration, and it directly shapes the work that we do. Because we are listening and because we are committed to being effective partners, we recently initiated consultation on 13 legislative proposals aimed at giving law enforcement greater access to the tools they need to protect tribal communities. These proposals reflect what we have heard from you all, from tribal leaders, about jurisdictional challenges, investigative barriers, and resource gaps. And I encourage you to participate fully in the consultation process and tell us where we can do better. When we meet with tribal leaders across the country, we consistently hear two urgent concerns. First is the need to confront violent crime, including the heartbreaking crisis of missing and murdered people, particularly women and children. Second is the need to stop drug trafficking organizations that exploit jurisdictional complexity and resource limitations to bring addiction, violence, and instability onto tribal lands. Today, I want to talk for just a few minutes about what the Department of Justice is doing to address both of these challenges and how we see our partnership with tribal nations as essential to that effort. As President Trump has rightly recognized, Americans across this country want safer communities. Under our great Attorney General Pam Bondi's leadership, the Department of Justice has returned to its core mission, protecting people and enforcing the law. Every day, law enforcement officers, agents, and prosecutors work to remove violent offenders, dismantle criminal organizations, enforce our immigration laws, and protect the rights of Americans. That renewed focus is producing real results. Nationally, these results are measurable. Last year, the United States recorded the lowest murder rate in a century. That doesn't just happen by accident. It happens when leadership backs law enforcement, when prosecutors are empowered to do their jobs, and when criminals understand that there are real consequences for breaking the law. But law and order must extend to every community, including Indian country. where public safety challenges have gone unaddressed for far too long. Those who live and work in Indian country know these challenges are not new. More than 50 years ago, a Department of Justice task force warned that reservation law enforcement faced serious strain due to jurisdictional complexity, limited resources, and gaps in coordination among federal, state, tribal, and local authorities. Unfortunately, many of these same challenges persist today, even though it's been 5 decades since that problem was identified by the Department of Justice. Violence in Indian country, particularly domestic and sexual violence against women and children, remains pervasive in too many communities. The complex patchwork of criminal jurisdiction can delay investigations and prosecutions, while persistent shortages of tribal law enforcement officers and prosecutors actually create opportunities for dangerous offenders to exploit gaps in enforcement. That dynamic is often compounded by criminal aliens who have entered the country illegally and who work alongside sophisticated drug trafficking organizations. What we have seen, which is probably not a surprise to many in this room, is that these cartels deliberately seek out areas where geography, jurisdiction, and limited resources make detection more difficult. They traffic fentanyl, meth, and other dangerous drugs into tribal communities, fueling addiction, violence, and loss. This is a reality that we are not willing to accept, and I know you are not willing to either. Reducing violent crime in Indian country was a cornerstone of the department's work during President Trump's first term, and it remains a priority today. We're determined to strengthen enforcement in a way that is effective, coordinated, and respectful of tribal sovereignty and the federal government's trust responsibilities. You have asked for stronger partnerships, and we're committed to delivering them. One of our flagship initiatives is the FBI's Operation Not Forgotten, which builds on efforts launched during President Trump's first term under an executive order establishing the task force on missing and murdered American Indians and Alaskan Natives. Operation Not Forgotten surges investigative intelligence and victim services resources into Indian country with a focus on violence against women and children. And in 2025, the FBI conducted the largest surge in the program's history, deploying 64 specialists for 6 months. This effort supported 339 investigations and led to 53 arrests. And that's not symbolic. They're operational commitments designed to bring accountability and justice where it has too often been delayed. I want to talk for just 1 minute about two cases that I hope underscore why Operation Not Forgotten matters and is making a difference. Both are from the district that we just heard from the congresswoman who just spoke. In one, the FBI investigated and the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Mexico indicted 3 men involved in a 2020 murder on the Navajo Nation and a subsequent cover-up of that murder. The case remained unsolved for many years. It was only after additional resources were deployed through Operation Not Forgotten that investigators were able to break through, and now those responsible will answer in a court of law and have been charged. In another case, the Department of Justice identified and charged a man for the sexual assault and kidnapping of 2 minor victims in Indian country, also in New Mexico. Crimes against one of those victims had gone unaddressed since 2014, over a decade. Our message is clear. Crimes committed against the most vulnerable will not be forgotten, and they will not be ignored. Operation Not Forgotten has supported more than 760 cases in just the past 3 years. It's resulted in hundreds of arrests and convictions and provided services to 2,000 victims and their family members. We're already planning for 2026, and we anticipate surging like we did last year, and we hope to have even better results. More broadly, the FBI's Indian country initiatives continue to deliver results. In the last fiscal year alone, those efforts led to 1,260 individuals charged 1,123 arrests, 304 weapons, illegal weapons recovered, and 458 child victims identified or located. The department's Missing and Murdered Indigenous People Outreach Program continues to build on work initiated during President Trump's first term. Through this program, federal, state, tribal, and local partners come together to identify missing and murdered cases, assess systematic challenges, and develop community-driven solutions tailored to the local needs of a particular area or tribe. At the same time, the United States Marshals Service, also part of the Department of Justice, is piloting a Missing Indigenous Children initiative that has already contributed to the recovery of 80 missing American Indian and Alaskan Native children. These recoveries reflect the power of focused enforcement combined with strong cross-jurisdictional coordination among all local law enforcement, tribal law enforcement, and the federal government. We also hear clearly from you all and from tribal partners about the continued impact of substance abuse and drug trafficking. Methamphetamine remains a serious threat in many regions. The opioid epidemic has also reached Indian country, obviously, with devastating consequences. In recent years, Native Americans have experienced the highest drug overdose death rates in the nation. And when drugs move into a community, violence is never far behind. For too long, drug trafficking organizations assumed that tribal lands lacked sufficient law enforcement coverage and were therefore safe havens for their operations. In this administration and partnering with folks in this room, we are making clear that this assumption is wrong. Just last year, in the first 10 months of President Trump's administration, the U.S. Attorney's offices around the country charged hundreds of defendants with drug trafficking offenses impacting tribal communities. The FBI conducts these investigations in close coordination with the DEA and the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Tribal Law Enforcement. This is done through its 29 Safe Trails task forces around the country. These task forces have been the backbone of federal investigative efforts in Indian country for decades, focusing on both violent crime and drug trafficking. Just this past year, we established a new Safe Trails Task Force in Colorado to provide much-needed investigative support in that area. On the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, the Badlands Safe Trails Task Force arrested 16 individuals involved in drug trafficking and seized illegal firearms and cash. That same month, and the U.S. Attorney's Office secured a 20-year prison sentence for a woman who organized the distribution of large quantities of meth onto the reservation, uprooting a cartel-linked operation. On the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, 2 illegal aliens with cartel ties received 15 and 10-year prison sentences for operating a meth distribution scheme on tribal land. We're also working with you all, with tribal nations and the DEA, using our El Paso Intelligence Center, EPIC, to develop a dashboard that tracks major drug seizures in Indian country in real time, allowing law enforcement to deploy resources more quickly and effectively. But we all know that enforcement's not enough. Training, prevention, community engagement, and money remain essential to success. Federal law enforcement agencies provide training to tribal, state, and local officers on jurisdiction, investigative techniques, and overdose response. And at the same time, department grant programs support treatment centers, victim services, and enforcement strategies tailored to local priorities. Now, partnership also means access to information and tools. And we have a tribal access program that provides tribal law enforcement with direct access to national crime databases. And through this program, tribes have entered more than 5,300 sex offender registrations, thousands of protective orders, and conducted nearly 40,000 fingerprint-based background checks. Everything that I've talked about can only be successful with the financial backing that will give you what you need to continue on this road. In the past year alone, the department delivered more than $150 million to tribes and tribal organizations through the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation and the Office of Violence Against Women. These grants and these resources are essential to sustaining public safety, supporting victims, and strengthening tribal justice systems, something that the Attorney General knows and believes in and will continue to support. Everything I have described today rests on one foundation, which is partnership, which means operational collaboration, daily coordination, and shared responsibility for results, which is what this department is trying to do every day. Please continue telling us what is working and what is not working. Continue engaging with the Office of Tribal Justice and continue challenging us to improve and get better. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I want to thank you guys for your leadership. You've taught me a lot. You've taught the folks that I work with a lot, and we want to continue that partnership going into the next several years. We will continue this work with urgency, determination, and respect for tribal sovereignty, and we will not rest until that work is done. Thank you all very much.